The night before my brother's wedding, I was sitting at my kitchen table folding laundry. Nothing dramatic. Just the low hum of the dishwasher, a lamp on over my shoulder, and a stack of neatly pressed shirts that still smelled faintly like detergent. My phone was face down beside me. I had spent the afternoon reviewing a property report and finalizing a transfer schedule. It was supposed to be a simple week. At 10:58 p.m., my phone buzzed once. I turned it over and saw my mother's name. I assumed it was about the rehearsal dinner, or maybe seating changes. Weddings create small emergencies. I was prepared for that. The message was short. Danielle, we've talked about it. It would be better if you didn't come tomorrow. Your presence doesn't really fit the atmosphere Caleb is trying to create. I read it twice, then once more. The dishwasher clicked into its drying cycle, a steady mechanical sound. I remember noticing that. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the folder sitting beside me on the table. Inside was the unsigned transfer agreement for the $3.2 million waterfront penthouse I had purchased as a wedding gift for my brother. He had never returned the final signature page. I placed the phone face down. Then I picked up another one and made a call. That call changed the direction of the entire week. And by Monday morning, the locks on that penthouse would belong to someone else. But at that moment, I just folded the last shirt and stacked it carefully. Calm, organized, quiet. My name is Danielle Hart. I'm 34 years old. I live in Seattle now, though I grew up outside Savannah, Georgia. I work in financial risk consulting for tech firms. It's precise work. Patterns, liabilities, exposure points. I've always been good at identifying weaknesses in systems. Family systems are no different. They just don't come with spreadsheets. Growing up, my younger brother Caleb was the center of gravity in our house. My father, Richard, would come home smelling faintly of motor oil and aftershave, and the first thing he'd ask was how Caleb's baseball practice went. I learned early that timing mattered. If I needed something, I waited until after dinner, after my father had eaten, after Caleb had finished telling his stories. One evening when I was 15, I asked for money for an advanced placement biology textbook. $37. My father didn't look up from the television. "Do you really need that?" he asked. Caleb had gotten new cleats that week. No one had asked him if he really needed those. I said I'd figure it out, and I did. I started working weekends at a marina bait shop. The air smelled like salt and gasoline. My hands were always dry from rope fibers and cardboard boxes. I saved everything: tuition, fees, emergency fund. I stopped asking for help entirely. Caleb, on the other hand, developed what I now understand as confidence without friction. My parents called it charisma. By the time I moved to Seattle in my 20s and built my consulting career, our family dynamic had calcified. I was dependable, financially stable, quiet. Caleb had ambition, big ideas, and consistent shortfalls. When he got engaged to a woman named Elise from a prominent local family in Savannah, my parents were thrilled. They started using phrases like elevating the family name. 6 months before the wedding, Caleb mentioned that housing in Savannah's historic district was competitive. He laughed about it over brunch. I didn't laugh. 3 weeks later, I purchased a penthouse unit overlooking the riverfront. Floor-to-ceiling windows, secure access, private parking, paid in full. My intention was simple: give him stability, give my parents something to point to proudly, remove one more excuse. I sent the transfer paperwork to Caleb's email. He never signed it. He kept saying he would get to it. I didn't push. Because I've learned something about leverage. You don't force it. You simply recognize when it exists. The week of the wedding, social media filled with photos of Caleb and Elise hosting pre-wedding dinners inside the penthouse. Champagne glasses, sunset terrace views, captions about hard work paying off. The deed, however, remained in my name. The night my mother told me not to attend because I didn't fit the atmosphere, something inside me didn't crack. It aligned. I opened my laptop and reviewed the purchase contract again. Section 14, Contingency Release, Emergency Liquidation Clause, clean. At 11:07 p.m., I called my real estate broker directly. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice heavy with sleep. "I need to activate the backup offer," I told her. "All cash, immediate close." There was a pause, paper rustling. "You're sure?" "Yes." The buyer had already cleared title. Funds were verified. We simply needed to trigger escrow release. By 8 a.m. the following morning, documents would move. By Friday afternoon, funds would settle. And by Monday, access codes would reset. I closed the laptop. The dishwasher stopped humming. The house felt very still. I went to bed without replying to my mother's message. Then I waited. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds in soft stripes across my office desk. The Seattle air was damp with early spring mist, carrying that faint scent of rain and wet concrete that always felt like home to me. I sipped my coffee slowly, black, feeling the warmth travel down my throat. My phone was silent. That was fine. I didn't need noise to confirm anything. I looked out the window at the street below. Delivery vans hummed past. A jogger went by, earbuds in. The world moved, unaware of the precise choreography happening on the other side of town. I thought about Savannah, the smell of old oak trees, the pond behind our childhood home, where I'd spent hours hiding from Caleb's teasing and the quiet judgment of my parents. That pond had been my sanctuary, my one place to breathe without being cataloged or measured. And it was gone now, at least in my control. 3 years ago, a developer had bought the plot using a dormant account of mine I hadn't checked. Someone had forged my signature, cashed out the inheritance, and disappeared into Las Vegas high-stakes gambling. Caleb. That much became clear when I ran the digital forensics report last week. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. That clarity settled over me like a second skin, precise and cool. Everything was a transaction. Everything had a ledger. And in this ledger, Caleb had made his final withdrawal without authorization. That made the rules simple. Step 1, identify the breach. Step 2, quantify it. Step 3, execute the corrective action. I opened the folder Julia had left on my desk, the same one that outlined the fraudulent land sale. She had flagged every account, every transfer, every timestamp. There was no dispute. Every entry had a digital footprint. Every footprint traced directly back to him. I traced my finger along the dates, the figures, the sequences. $360,000 had moved in 48 hours. Casino entries, wire transfers, unrecoverable. The property itself sold for $180,000, gone in minutes. I didn't let myself dwell on the sentimental loss. That was irrelevant. What mattered was leverage and consequence. My career had taught me patience. I had built strategies on months of meticulous calculations. Mistakes could be exploited, and every action had a reaction. Caleb had assumed my generosity was endless. He had assumed the world owed him access because of family ties. That assumption was about to be tested. I reviewed the Penthouse documents again. The sale I was about to trigger was clean. Escrow was ready. The backup buyer had already cleared the credit check, title search, and contingency-free release. All that remained was my authorization. I made another cup of coffee. The steam blurred the edge of my laptop screen. I placed my hand on the keyboard and waited. The silence was active. It wasn't emptiness, it was observation, decision-making. Every second I waited was a second I maintained control. By mid-morning, I confirmed the wire transfer. The money left escrow. Digital confirmation pinged on my phone. I allowed myself a brief moment to watch it. $3,200,000 transferred. The balance sheet reflected my autonomy. Then I reviewed Caleb's online activity. He had posted a carousel of professional quality photos on social media, his engagement celebrations, the penthouse terrace, champagne flutes catching the sunlight. The caption read, "Finally in our forever home, hard work pays off." I stared at it. Hard work pays off. But the house was never his. Every brick, every window, Every lock had been bought and maintained by me. He was selling an illusion, branding my capital as his character. I made a note. Observation. No emotion. Just facts. Later that afternoon, I packed a small bag and drove to the office of Julia Carmichael, family law attorney and my friend since college. The city rolled past in muted shades of gray and green. The hum of traffic was constant, grounding. Julia greeted me quietly. Her office smelled faintly of toner and leather. She slid the thick gray folder across the polished mahogany desk. "Danielle," she said calmly, "we were looking for leverage in case Caleb contests the Penthouse sale, but I found something more precise." I opened it. Inside were copies of deeds, transaction logs, and digital bank statements. One document caught my attention: the forged sale of the Georgia land. Danielle Hart, my own name, signed in a hurried, unnatural curve. Caleb had not just mismanaged a family asset, he had impersonated me. I leaned back in the chair. The office remained quiet, and I allowed myself a single deep breath. There was no rush. There was no panic. This was leverage. Step 1, complete. Then I thought about the Penthouse again. Step 2, finalize control. Step 3, observe response. Everything was aligned, precise, and, most importantly, clean. I put the folder down. Julia nodded. We didn't speak further. Plans were already in motion. I left the office with the same calm I had maintained throughout my life, carrying the certainty that everything I had built would meet the reality it deserved to encounter. I drove home slowly, windows down. The air smelled of rain, of concrete, of spring. The city felt steady. I did not rush. I did not react. I observed, and I waited. By late afternoon, the Seattle sky had thickened with clouds. The smell of damp asphalt rose from the streets, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee shops and rain-soaked evergreens. I parked near my apartment and walked inside, setting my bag on the counter. Everything was quiet, orderly. My phone remained untouched, still face down on the kitchen island. I poured a glass of water and sat at the table, sliding open the folder from Julia once more. The deeds, bank statements, and transaction logs lay neatly in front of me. Each sheet confirmed what I already knew. Caleb had misappropriated the Georgia property, forging my signature and moving the money through accounts I had neglected to monitor. He had built an identity on stolen capital. I rubbed my temples and thought in steps. Step 1, confirm control over the Penthouse. Done. Escrow had released the funds, the new owner's bank account was verified, and the keys would change hands the following morning. Step 2, gather all evidence. Done. Bank transfers, property deeds, digital footprints, time-stamped logs, every entry immutable. Step 3, prepare the official notification, not to punish, to state fact, to define reality. I opened my laptop and drafted the message to Julia, clearly outlining the steps for filing a criminal complaint for forgery and unauthorized transactions. The wording was precise, clinical. There was no accusation of intent, only documentation, dates, amounts, and confirmation. I hit send. Then I checked Caleb's social media again. New photos from the engagement party. The Penthouse terrace gleamed in sunset gold. Champagne flutes clinked. He had no awareness that the legal reality had already shifted beneath him. That's how leverage works: unseen, silent, irreversible. I closed my laptop and moved to the window, looking out at the rain-slick streets. My mind wandered back to my father, Richard. I remembered a Saturday morning when I was 12, standing at the kitchen counter asking for $42 to buy science and history textbooks. Caleb had been handed a crisp $50 for a baseball tournament. My father smiled warmly at him, oblivious to my need. I had learned then that visibility in a family doesn't always correspond with merit. Some are rewarded by default. Others must earn every inch. I made a note in my mental ledger. Nothing has changed. The principles are the same: observation, calculation, patience, execution. Later, I went to the storage room and pulled out the leather-bound folder containing the unsigned Penthouse documents. I ran my finger along the signature line, remembering Caleb's casual dismissal, his assumption that I would never follow through. That assumption was the pivot point of control. I dialed Julia's direct line from the kitchen, careful to keep my tone neutral. "It's time," I said. Her voice was calm, already in motion. "Everything will be filed before tonight. He won't have the option to reverse anything." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. The clarity was comforting. No emotion, no drama, no yelling, just the articulation of rules and outcomes. I spent the evening reviewing digital communications, social media posts, emails, text messages. Each one mapped a pattern of entitlement and disregard. Every act of negligence, every lie, every misused asset, cataloged. I kept a running timeline. By the time the authorities would see it, the narrative would be immutable. Then I opened a drawer and pulled out my mother's last text again. "Your presence doesn't really fit the atmosphere." I read it slowly, deliberately, hearing the precise phrasing. Not cruel, not abusive, just indifferent. The message was not about me. It was about control, about hierarchy, about maintaining appearances. I put the phone face down again. By 10:30 p.m., I had everything prepared. Escrow confirmed. Legal complaint drafted. Evidence compiled and verified. Timeline established for authorities. Communications logged and time-stamped. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Every piece aligned. I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a single thought. The game has changed. Then I waited. The night deepened outside the window. Rain tapped lightly against the glass. The hum of the city softened. For the first time in years, the invisible chain I had carried felt like it had loosened. And yet, there was one final act remaining. The confrontation. Not emotional, not dramatic, just factual, precise, and irreversible. I stood and collected the folders. The streetlights outside flickered through the wet leaves. I slipped the documents into a secure bag, zipped it closed, and left my apartment. Calm, observant, prepared. The penthouse was waiting, Caleb unaware, and I was ready. The streets of Savannah were quiet as I drove toward the historic district. Spring rain left the pavement slick and reflective, making the amber streetlights shimmer like liquid gold. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. Calm, intentional. The city moved around me, unaware of the sequence of actions about to unfold inside the penthouse. When I arrived, I parked a few blocks away. The air smelled faintly of wet brick and jasmine from the nearby gardens. I walked the last stretch slowly, letting each step fall in rhythm with my breathing. Observation first, presence second. Control was not loud, it was measured. The penthouse doors were sleek, glass with brushed metal handles. I didn't rush. I unlocked the backup key code I had authorized through escrow, the one tied to the new owner. The system responded with a single soft beep. The door clicked open. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of polished wood and citrus cleaner, the lingering scent of the staging team. I moved deliberately from room to room, checking that everything matched the digital confirmation Julia had provided. All keys accounted for, all access points secured. No loose ends. I took a seat near the terrace window, the city lights reflecting in the glass. My phone buzzed softly. I opened the message. Confirmation from escrow. The funds had cleared. The buyer's account received the total wire transfer. Final step executed. Step 3 complete. I didn't feel triumph. I felt precision. Each act was logical, predictable, accountable. My focus shifted naturally to Caleb. The realization that he would arrive unaware of these changes allowed me to plan the next move with clarity. I pulled out the envelope Julia had prepared for delivery, the documentation of Caleb's forgery of the Georgia property deed, the full timeline of unauthorized transfers, and the digital forensics report. All factual, no emotion, no accusation beyond evidence. I arranged them neatly on the small marble table in the living room. Everything visible, everything legible. I reviewed the sequence in my mind. Step 1. Confirmed sale of the penthouse. Completed. Step 2. Evidence of fraudulent activity compiled. Ready. Step 3. Present documentation in a controlled, neutral setting. Scheduled for arrival. I set the folder aside, then checked the apartment again. Door locks engaged, security systems active, all surveillance logs ready for documentation purposes. Nothing unmonitored, nothing ambiguous. I thought back to my father's kitchen, the Saturday morning when I asked for money for textbooks, and Caleb received the $50. That memory was not a source of anger. It was an anchor. It reminded me why I had built systems of my own, why I had worked double shifts in high school, saved every penny, and advanced through a career in financial strategy. Every lesson reinforced the rules I now applied: assessment, preparation, execution. By 11:15 p.m., I heard the faint sound of tires on the wet pavement. Caleb was approaching. I stayed seated, folder in view, waiting. The apartment's lights reflected off the glass doors, illuminating the papers without creating glare. He tried the code. A sharp beep, then the flat red error tone. Confusion flashed across his face. He jiggled the handle. Nothing. He tried again, more forcefully. Still locked. I remained silent, calm, observant. He stepped back, eyebrows furrowed, glancing around. That's when I stood. Shoes soft against the polished hardwood, I walked into the terrace light. Slow, deliberate. "Danielle," he said, voice rising slightly, tension in every syllable. Why won't the door open?" I gestured to the folder on the table. No words beyond what the documents already stated. He approached it cautiously. Fingers hovered over the papers. I did not speak. I waited. Step 4 was now active. Observation of response. Controlled escalation. Documented, precise. Every reaction he made was part of the unfolding ledger. The penthouse, the city lights, the rain-slick street outside, all elements of the system I had constructed. Every detail aligned. No drama, no shouting, only fact. And in that stillness, I knew one thing. The next moments would define the outcome entirely. Then Caleb picked up the folder. His hands trembled slightly, eyes scanning, recalculating. That subtle shift, the recognition of reality diverging from assumption, was the first real sign that the system had functioned as designed. I did not speak. I simply waited. The city hummed faintly below. The documents remained between us. Silence, controlled, deliberate. And the first cracks of truth were just beginning to show. Caleb's eyes moved across the folder slowly, methodically, as if trying to will the numbers and signatures into a different story. The rain outside had eased to a light drizzle, pattering softly against the terrace glass. I stayed seated, hands folded on my lap, observing. Calm, patient. He paused on the deed for the Georgia property. The signature line, my name forged, stared back at him in black ink. His fingers hovered over it for a moment too long, as if touching it could erase what had already happened. This isn't right," he muttered, his voice low, almost a question. I didn't respond. Silence was deliberate. Facts spoke louder than any argument. He flipped the bank statements and transaction logs, eyes widening as he traced the flow of money through accounts he had assumed would remain hidden. The penthouse, the forged land sale, the unauthorized transfers, every piece of evidence was exact, time-stamped, cross-referenced. There was no ambiguity, no loopholes. I can fix this," he said, fumbling for a reason, any excuse that could realign reality with his expectations. "You cannot," I replied quietly, letting the words rest between us. Clear, precise. Fact, not emotion. The funds have cleared. The sale is complete. The authorities have the reports. Caleb slumped slightly, a man forced to confront a ledger he had spent years assuming would bend to him. His designer suit felt out of place in the cold, quiet apartment. The air smelled faintly of rain, polish, and citrus cleaner. I moved one chair slightly closer, just enough to observe him, but not to intimidate. "The penthouse is no longer yours," I said. "Your actions are documented. Forgery, unauthorized transactions. The police report will reflect every step." He swallowed hard, hands gripping the edge of the table. "Danielle, please. It was supposed to be a surprise. I thought—" "Assumptions do not override legal reality," I said evenly. No anger, no hesitation, just clarity. He looked down at the documents, then at me. The illusion of authority he had built on my resources crumbled visibly. Every social media post, every staged photograph, every boast about the penthouse terrace, all hollow. A long silence followed. I didn't break it. I allowed him to process, to see the chain of cause and effect. Observation, clarity, control. Finally, his voice cracked. "And the money from the land?" "Gone," I said simply. "Spent, unauthorized. Account logs confirm every transaction. You cannot recover it." He leaned back, rubbing his face with one hand, realization settling over him like a weight he could no longer lift. Then he glanced at the folder again, eyes lingering on the bank transfers, the deeds, the timestamps. He could not deny what was before him. I observed everything, the slight tremor in his jaw, the shallow breathing, the shift from anger to comprehension. He had built a life on my generosity and negligence. Now that life was measured against hard facts, and it no longer existed. He exhaled slowly, finally looking up at me. I didn't think—" "You acted on assumption, not permission," I said. Calm, neutral. "Everything you counted on has already been corrected. The penthouse, the funds, the reports. Irreversible. Reality does not bend to entitlement." He sank onto one of the lounge chairs, head in hands. I remained standing, a quiet presence, letting the weight of evidence and timing do the work. There was no spectacle, no emotional tirade, only fact. The documents, the transferred funds, the police report, all final. Step 4, the confrontation, complete. Controlled, predictable, precise. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected softly in the terrace glass. The hum of distant traffic underscored the quiet authority of the moment. And I knew, without doubt, that the system I had built, careful, deliberate, patient, was now fully operational. Caleb's assumptions had collapsed under the weight of methodical preparation. I stepped back, allowing him the space to absorb the outcome. The confrontation was over. The facts had spoken. Then I gathered my bag, zipped it closed, and left the penthouse. Calm, unhurried, and resolute. Every step echoed the same principle. Clarity and order define power, not shouting or coercion. I walked toward the streetlights, letting the glow wash over the wet pavement, and felt the final shift begin. The following morning, Seattle was quiet under a low-hanging mist. The streets glistened from overnight rain, reflecting pale morning light off the pavement. I sipped a cup of coffee at the small table in my apartment, watching the city wake slowly. Every detail felt measured, deliberate, grounded. I checked my phone. Julia had sent a brief message. "All filings completed, police report logged, escrow confirmed, timeline documented, no further action required on your end." I nodded, setting the cup down. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just fact. The system I had put in place had worked exactly as intended. Later that afternoon, I reviewed the account transfer. The $3.5 million had arrived in my bank, cleared and irreversible. Each digit represented the closing of a chapter I had carried for over 30 years, the invisible chain of family neglect, entitlement, and exploitation finally broken. I did not dwell on past injuries. I did not celebrate. I verified, recorded, and organized. Caleb faced the consequences that matched the reality he had created for himself. The police had filed felony charges for forgery and grand larceny. He had no access to the penthouse, no assets hidden in my accounts, and no social leverage to lean on. The moment his assumptions met the hard ledger of law and process, his constructed world collapsed. I also confirmed that Jasmine, realizing the foundation of their marriage was built on deception, had filed for annulment. She had reclaimed control of her own funds and stepped back from the illusion Caleb had sold her. That, too, was precise. No drama, only resolution. With the penthouse sale complete and legal steps finalized, I focused on forward motion. I established the legacy foundation using a portion of the funds. Its purpose was clear: support students who, like I had at 16, worked double shifts at diners or entry-level jobs to pursue education. Those who had been overlooked, undervalued, or treated as expendable. Facts over feelings, structure over chaos, order over neglect. I met with Julia briefly to review final filings and confirm the foundation's initial disbursements. Everything was organized and documented. She left, and I returned to the quiet of my apartment, the hum of the city below acting as a soft, steady companion. That evening, I met Jasmine at a small waterfront cafe. The air smelled of salt and faint rain, the chairs cool against our hands. We spoke about her plans to return to school, funded by her reclaimed resources. There were no apologies exchanged for the past. None were necessary. Instead, we clinked our coffee mugs together, a small gesture of mutual acknowledgement, respect, and shared understanding. I walked home slowly, noticing the small details, the rustle of leaves in the alleyways, the distant sound of a ferry horn, the faint hum of streetlights. Each step was a reminder that clarity and preparation can replace years of expectation and neglect. I organized my apartment, set my desk with the folders, and walked the perimeter of my routines. Everything had its place. I realized that the most dangerous prison is often invisible, waiting for approval from people who will never provide it. Reclaiming space, asserting boundaries, and asserting ownership over your own resources and life is not cruelty. It is survival. It is clarity. It is necessary. I put the phone face down. Outside, the last traces of rain reflected the city's lights. Calm returned. Order remained. Control was complete. And quietly, I considered the next steps, not out of malice, but responsibility. There were others, like I had once been, who needed support, who had been overlooked, undervalued, or taken for granted. That work had only just begun. The day closed without fanfare. The documents were filed, the accounts reconciled, the actions irreversible, and in that quiet, I finally felt settled.